we are going to discuss about the factoring difference of two squares na. So, there are a few steps we have to follow when it comes to factoring the OTS. And step number 1 is to factor out the GCMF if there is. So, ito yung sinasabi ko sa inyo. Kaya kailangan mapanood nyo muna yung unang video about factoring greatest common monomial factor dahil sila lagi or ito lagi yung nasa step 1 natin. Step 2 is to get the square root of the first term. And step 3, get the square root of the last term. Step number 4, express the answer as the product of the sum and difference of the square roots of the first and last terms. Ang haba, pero madali lang yan. Okay? So let's apply these 4 steps in factoring the OTS. And here is our first example. A squared minus 16. So before we apply the 4 steps, kailangan muna nating alamin if these two terms or these binomials is considered as DOTS. So, kailangan, ang unang condition is that these two terms are perfect squares and the second condition is that the operation in between is minus. So far naman ay pasok siya sa dalawa nating conditions. So, let's move to our factoring steps. So, number 1, we have to factor out the GCMF is if there is. Meron pa ba tayong greatest common monomial factor na kayang ma-factor out dito sa ating unang example? So, the answer is, there is no GCMF. So, let's move to our second step. Get the square root of the first term. Ang first term natin ay a squared. At ano ang square root ni a squared? That is a. Next, step 3. Get the square root of the last term or the second term. We have 16. Square root of 16 is, okay, 4. And then the last step, express the answer as the product of the sum and difference. So when we say sum, addition, difference, subtraction of the square roots. So kailangan daw natin ng sum ng square roots at difference ng square roots and their product. So ganito po yung itsura niya. So this is the sum of the square roots and this is the difference of the square roots. And when we say product, so we have to enclose both of these binomials into parentheses. So, A or quantity of A plus 4 multiplied to quantity of A minus 4. So, this will be our factored form for A squared minus 16. So, A squared minus 16 is equal to the quantity of A plus 4 multiplied with the quantity of A minus 4. Okay? So, medyo mahaba lang basahin yung ating last step, pero ito yung ating kailangang sundin. Next example. Example number 2. So, let's factor j to the 4th power minus 121. So, j to the 4th is a perfect square. 121 is also a perfect square. And then, minus ang operation. So, pasok siya as DOTS. Ano po? So, step 1, factor out the GCMF if there is. Meron pa ba siyang greatest common factor? So far, wala naman po. Ano? Step number 2, get the square root of the first term. So, our first term is j to the 4th. So, get the square root of j to the 4th. The answer is j squared. Step number 3, get the square root of the last term or the second term, 121. So, what is the square root of 121? That is 11. And then, on step 4, kailangan natin silang i-combine the sum and the difference, the product of the sum and the difference of the square roots. So, sum, j squared plus 11, difference, j squared minus 11, and then their product. So, magiging quantity of j squared plus 11 times the quantity of j squared minus 11. So, this will be our factored form for our example number 2. Okay? Okay, so let us have example number 3. So, we have 49m squared minus 196n to the 4th power. So, ang ating 49m squared may square root, 196 may square root, and to the fourth power has also a square root. So, pasok siya sa unang condition. And then, on the second condition, kailangan minus ang operation. So, pasok din siya. Ano po? Now, proceed to our steps on factoring the OTS. Number 1, factor out the greatest common monomial factor if there is. So, wala naman po siyang GCMF. Ano? Next, step number 2, get the square root of the first term. So, ang first term natin is square root of 49m squared. What is the square root of 49? That is 7. And the square root of m squared is m. Okay, for step number 3, we have to get the square root of the last term. The last term is 196 n to the fourth power. And what is its square root? That is 14n squared. And then we have the last step. We have to write it as product of the sum and difference of the square root. So, paano nga ba yun? The answer is the quantity of 7m plus 14n squared multiplied to the quantity of 7m minus 14n squared. So, that will be our final answer. Now, let us have example number 4. So, factor 50x cubed minus 32xy squared. Okay? So, on our first condition, are the two terms perfect square? The answer is no. Mapapaisip tayo, hindi naman siya perfect square. Pero minus yung operation niya. So, pasok siya sa second condition. But the thing is, hindi pa rin siya perfect square. So, tingnan pa rin natin. Let us apply step number 1. Factor out the greatest common monomial factor if there is. Meron ba tayong number and variable? Meron ba tayong constant and variable na pwedeng i-divide out dito sa ating binomial? 50 and 32. They are both divisible by 2. And x cubed and x, common sa kanila, pareho silang may x, na variable, so kailangan natin siyang i-factor out. So, our GCMF is 2x. So, pag na-factor out natin si 2x, 50x cubed divided by 2x, the answer is 25x squared. And 32xy squared divided by 2x. So, 32 divided by 2, the answer is negative 16. And then x divided by x is 1. So, canceled out na or 1 na lang yung ating x na yon. So, 16 times 1 times y squared, the answer is 16y squared. Now, kung titingnan natin to, 25x squared minus 16y squared. So, dito na tayo titingin sa factored form. Perfect squares ba itong dalawang to? Okay. May square root si 25, may square root si 16, may square root si x squared, may square root si y squared. So, meron na tayo ngayong difference of two squares dito sa ating naging factored form. So, yan ngayon yung ifa-factor natin. So, step 2, get the square root of the first term. So, yung 25x squared na yung tinutukoy dito. What is the square root of 25x squared? The answer is 5x. Step 3, get the square root of the last term. So, ito na yung last term natin. 16y squared. What is the square root of 16? That is 4. And then the square root of y squared is y. Now, on step number 4, kailangan po natin i-express itong ating factors as the product and sum of difference of the square roots. So, yun pa rin, 5x and 4y, kailangan i-add at saka kailangan i-minus, but hindi natin pwedeng kalimutan na meron tayong GCMF. So, yan yung ngayon nasa pinakaunahan. Yung GCMF natin, 2x, hindi siya pwedeng makalimutan. And then, yung ating sum of the square roots at yung ating difference of the square roots. So, ito ngayon yung ating factored form. Again, hindi lahat ng binomial sa unang tingin ay perfect squares. Kaya, we have to still try to do step number 1, which is to factor out the GCMF kasi it might be possible na ang kalalabasan nito kapag nakapag-factor out na tayo ng GCMF is a perfect square binomial or yung ating difference of two squares. So, ayan. So, the final answer, GCMF, sum of the square roots, difference of the square roots. Okay? So, let's move to our fifth example. Example number 5. Let us factor 12m to the sixth power n cubed minus 147m squared n to the fifth power. So, as you can see, again, kung titingnan natin tong dalawang terms natin, hindi sila perfect square because 12 doesn't have a square root and 147 also doesn't have a square root. And also, as you can see, m on the first term, there is also m on the second term. And there is an n on the first term and also n on the second term. So that means we can apply step number 1, that is to factor out the greatest common monomial factor if there is. So, ibig sabihin lang po nun, meron tayong GCMF na pwedeng ma-factor out dito sa ating example number 5. So, ano nga kaya? When it comes to constants or coefficients, 12 and 147, ano nga kaya ang pwede natin ipang-divide? So, that is 3. And then, we have m to the 6th and m squared. So, ang common ng m and the least exponent is yung 2. So, m squared will be our GCF when it comes to m. And then on n, common ng n, alin ang mas maliit na exponent, that is cube. So, our GCF when it comes to n is n cube. So, our GCF or GCMF will be 3m squared n cube. And if we factor that out in our binomial, 12 divided by 3 will be 4. M to the 6 divided by m squared is m to the 4th. N cubed divided by n cubed, so that will be 1. Minus 147 divided by 3, that will be 49. M squared divided by m squared, that will be 1. And then n to the 5th divided by n cubed, that will be n squared. Okay? So, dito na tayo ngayon titingin sa binomial or sa factored form na binomial. Then, let us proceed to step number 2. Get the square root of the first term. So, what is the square root of 4m to the 4th power? So, that is 2m squared. And then, on step number 3, get the square root of the second term. What is the square root of 49n squared? That is 7n. And then, on our last step, again, bawal po itong makalimutan, we have to write the GCF or GCMF first, followed by the sum of the square roots and then the difference of the square root. So, this will be our final answer for example number 5. The factored form of 12m to the 6th power n cubed minus 147m squared n to the 5th is no other than 3m squared n cubed multiplied to the quantity of 2m squared plus 7n multiplied to the quantity of 2m squared minus 7n. Okay, so let's now proceed with our example number 6. Let us factor this binomial 36x cubed y to the 5th minus xyz to the 6th power. So as you can see, 36 or our coefficient is perfect square, while when it comes to our variables, there are common variables that we need to factor out. So we will going to do the step number 1. We have to factor out the greatest common monomial factor. So, since common ang x sa kanila, what is the smallest exponent or least exponent among the two x? So, we have x cubed and x. Alin ang may least exponent? That is x. And then, y to the 5th and y. Alin ang may least exponent? That is y. And then, let us get or factor out this GCMF on our first term. 36x cubed y to the 5th divided by xy. So, we still have the coefficient 36. X cubed divided by x. So, may matitirang x squared. Y to the 5th divided by y. May matitirang y to the 4th power. Minus x divided by x, that is 1. Y divided by y, that is also 1. So, ang matitira na lang on the second term is z to the sixth power. And as you can see, 36x squared y to the fourth minus z to the sixth power is now an example of a difference of two squares. So what we're going to do is to proceed to our step number 2 and 3, that is to get the square root of the first term and get the square root of the last term. So what is the square root of 36? That is 6. What is the square root of x squared? That is x. And the square root of y to the fourth, that is y squared. Now, what is the square root of z to the sixth power? That is z cubed. So, ang gagawin nyo ngayon, kopyahin nyo yan, 6xy squared and then z cube. Anong kulang? Kailangan mapakita natin na siya ay sum and difference. And also, bawal nating kalimutan sa ating final answer ang ating, ang tawag natin dito. This is what we call GCMF. So, our final answer now in our example number 6 is, ayan, so we have xy multiplied to the quantity of 6x squared y squared plus z cubed multiplied to the quantity of 6xy squared minus z cubed. Okay? So let's now proceed to our next example. Example number 7. We have 49x to the 6th power y to the 4th minus 1/4. O ayan, meron tayong fraction. Kailangan ba nating matakot? Syempre hindi po. So tingnan natin kung perfect squared nga ba sila? May square root ba si 49? Yes. May square root ba si x to the 6th y to the 4th? Yes. May square root ba si 1/4? The answer is also yes. So, perfect square yung ating first and second term, and then our middle term is a -1. So, pasok siya as difference of two squares. Step number 1 is to factor out the greatest common monomial factor. Meron ba siyang GCMF? So, wala na. Ano po? Since kita naman natin na siya ay perfect squared. So, proceed tayo sa step number 2, and that is to get the square root of the first term. What is the square root of 49? So, that is 7. What is the square root of x to the 6th power? So, that is x cubed. What is the square root of our y to the 4th power? That is y squared. And then, what is the square root of 1/4? So, ano ba ang square root ng 1? Di po ba 1? And then, anong square root ng 4? So, that is 2. And wag natin kakalimutan, we should form our answer as sum and difference of their square roots. So, meron na tayong final answer, and that is the quantity of 7x cubed y squared plus 1/2 multiplied to the quantity of 7x cubed y squared minus 1/2. Okay, so let's now proceed to the last example in factoring difference of two squares. So we have here the quantity of 3m minus 4 squared minus 64. Baka maisip nyo, ma'am, di naman po perfect square ang 3m. Paano po natin ito i-factor? So, wag po kayong titingin lang dyan sa 3m kasi parenthesis siya or naka-quantity siya. Ibig sabihin, itong 3m minus 4, meron tayong dalawang 3m minus 4 kasi naka-squared nga siya. And, kung natatandaan nyo dun sa sinabi ko kanina, na any variable with the exponent that is divisible by 2, it is considered as perfect squared, no? So, we can factor this as DOTS. So, let's do that. Paghiwalayin natin yung dalawang 3m minus 4. So, we have 3m minus 4. Then, the other one here, 3m minus 4. And then, what is the square root of 64? That is 8. Okay? And then, we have to show the sum and the difference of the square root of the two terms. And wag natin kakalimutan yung ating grouping symbol since nagamit na natin yung parentheses, ang next na dapat natin gamitin ay ang bracket. So, pwede rin po natin siyang i-form as difference muna, 3m minus 4 minus 8, ayan. And then, dito yung sum, quantity of 3m minus 4 plus 8. So, this will be our final answer. So, ito yung dalawang itsura ng ating final answer. And, ayan, that's all for today. So I hope you have learned something about factoring difference of two squares, and there will be another video for another factoring technique, so stay tuned. Bye-bye!